You're already there. Will come if she actually dies. My father sent that message while his own mother was in emergency surgery. I was sitting alone in the hospital waiting room when I read it. The place smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. The lights were too bright. The chairs were stiff plastic. Other families sat together whispering and holding hands while machines beeped softly behind the ICU doors. I stared at my phone, hoping I had misunderstood the message. But I had not. Days later, during my grandmother's funeral, the pastor opened a letter she had left behind. The room went silent as he read her words out loud, because my grandmother had been preparing for that moment long before she died. My name is Natalie Carter, and I'm 35 years old. I work as a hospice nurse in Pittsburgh. Most days, I help people through the final stage of their lives. I sit beside hospital beds. I hold hands. I listen to families say goodbye. Death is part of my job. I have seen it hundreds of times. But nothing prepares you for watching someone you love face it alone. My grandmother, Margaret Carter, helped raise me after my parents spent most of their time chasing their own interests. She was patient, stubborn, and proud. She believed family should always show up when it mattered most. She used to say, if someone is hurting, you don't send a text. You walk through the door. My parents believed something very different. Daniel Carter and Patricia Carter called when they remembered. They visited when it was convenient. Every conversation somehow turned toward money. They asked about the value of Grandma's house more than they asked about her health. I lived a simple life. Long shifts at the hospice center. A small apartment above a bakery that always smelled like fresh bread in the morning. But my job had taught me something useful. Hospice nurses document everything. Times, calls, visitors, decisions. Because when families argue later, records tell the truth. When my grandmother went into emergency surgery, those habits became the only things standing between truth and the lies my parents would later try to tell. If you've ever been the one who showed up while others stayed away, subscribe to this channel. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know if you've ever carried the weight of a family situation like this. Your story matters too. And if you believe loyalty should mean something, click like. One Tuesday afternoon, I was finishing paperwork at the hospice center when my phone rang. Pittsburgh General Hospital, the caller ID said. My stomach tightened before I even answered. A nurse spoke quickly. Natalie, your grandmother Margaret Carter was brought in by ambulance. She has a ruptured bowel and severe infection. The doctors are preparing emergency surgery. I grabbed a pen. Is she conscious? I asked. Barely. Surgery is extremely risky at her age. I'm coming, I said. I hung up and immediately called my father. 4 rings. Voicemail. I called my mother. 6 rings. Nothing. I opened our family group chat and typed fast. Grandma is in emergency surgery at Pittsburgh General. It's serious. Please come. Both messages were marked read within minutes. No reply. I drove to the hospital with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Inside the ICU waiting room, the air felt cold and smelled like antiseptic. A television played quietly in the corner while families whispered around me. A nurse asked, "Are other relatives coming?" "Yes," I said. The lie slipped out before I could stop it. Hours passed slowly. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it felt like it was inside my head. At 7 p.m., I sent another update in the group chat. Still in surgery. Read. No response. At 8:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from my father. You're already there. Will come if she actually dies. I read it 3 times. My chest felt hollow. Around me, families were comforting each other. A woman hugged her brother. A teenager leaned against his father's shoulder. I sat alone. At 9:51 p.m., the surgeon stepped through the double doors and walked toward me slowly. I knew the look on his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She didn't survive the procedure." The words felt heavy in the air. I thanked him. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Then I called my parents. My father answered first. "She didn't make it. I told him." There was a short pause. "Okay," he said. "We'll deal with the funeral tomorrow." That was it. I called my mother next. Well, she sighed. At her age, it was probably for the best. The call ended. I sat in that waiting room another 20 minutes listening to the quiet hum of hospital machines. That was the moment I understood something clearly. I had been the only person who showed up. Funeral planning started 2 days later. My parents suddenly appeared, full of sad expressions and quiet voices. My father shook hands with relatives and said, "Losing Mom has been very hard." Yet every practical responsibility landed on my shoulders. Paperwork, burial arrangements, church coordination. While we sat at the kitchen table reviewing documents, my father leaned back and said casually, "We should talk about the house soon." I stared at him. "The funeral is tomorrow," I said. He shrugged, just being practical. That same evening, I began sorting through my grandmother's desk. Inside a folder, I found something unexpected. Hospital visitor logs from 5 years earlier during her stroke recovery. 6 weeks in the hospital. My father had visited once. 12 minutes. Next to the logs were bank records. Thousands of dollars transferred to him over several years. None repaid. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Then the funeral arrived. The church was quiet and filled with the soft smell of old wood and flowers. My parents sat in the front row, holding tissues and speaking softly to everyone who passed. To anyone watching, they looked like grieving children. Halfway through the service, the pastor paused. "There is something Margaret asked me to share," he said. He held up a sealed envelope. She left instructions regarding this letter if her son Daniel attended today. My father shifted in his seat. The pastor opened the envelope slowly, and the entire church grew silent. What my parents did not know was that I had already started documenting everything the night she went into surgery. I had screenshots of every message they ignored. Hospital visitor records showing I was the only one there when she died. My grandmother had saved bank statements and old voicemails too. Many of them were my father asking for financial help. But the most important piece was something else. A video recording she had made months earlier explaining why she changed her will. She spoke calmly in that recording, clear, confident. I had a plan, and my grandmother had been building the evidence for years. 2 days after the funeral, my grandmother's lawyer called me. Richard Holloway speaking. The voice said, I remembered him from childhood visits to her house. He had handled her legal matters for decades. We met in his quiet office downtown. Stacks of documents sat neatly across his desk. Your grandmother updated her will recently, he said. He slid the document toward me. The house and most of her estate were left to me, not to my father. Richard adjusted his glasses. She made this decision very carefully. He said, there are notarized records confirming she was mentally competent. I nodded slowly. My parents still believed everything would go to them. Richard folded his hands and looked directly at me. Daniel will probably challenge this. He said calmly, when that happens, bring every piece of documentation you have. 2 weeks later, the challenge arrived. My father claimed I had manipulated my grandmother. The case moved to court. The courtroom felt tense the morning of the hearing. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted quietly. My father's lawyer stood first. Margaret Carter was elderly and vulnerable, he said. Natalie Carter pressured her into changing the will. I sat still. Then our lawyer began presenting the evidence. First came the hospital logs, proving my parents never visited during her final hours. Next came the bank records showing unpaid loans. Then the voicemail recordings played through the courtroom speakers. My father's voice echoed through the room. Mom, I need help again, just until next month. The judge listened carefully. Finally, our lawyer played the video message. My grandmother appeared on the screen, sitting in her living room chair. Her voice was steady. Natalie stayed when I needed someone. She said, my son only called when he needed money. The courtroom fell silent. The judge closed the file a few minutes later. This will is clear, intentional, and thoroughly documented. He said the case was dismissed. My parents left the courtroom furious. The truth had already been preserved long before the trial began. I moved into my grandmother's house a few months later. The garden behind the house had grown wild. Weeds covered the flower beds she once cared for every morning. I spent weeks restoring it, plant by plant. While living there, I started something new, a small nonprofit in her name that helps elderly people document their wishes and protect themselves from exploitation. Sometimes families listen, sometimes they do not, but records protect the truth. Every time I help someone preserve their story, I remember that quiet hospital waiting room. In the end, my grandmother did not just leave me a house. She left proof that showing up matters more than anything else. Have you ever been the only person who showed up when someone needed you most? That responsibility can feel heavy, especially when others walk away. If you have lived through something like that, share your story in the comments so others know they are not alone. Subscribe to this community for more real stories like this. Click share to help this story reach people who need to hear it. Did this story hit home for you? Let me know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts below. Click share so this story travels further. Your support reminds people everywhere that they are not alone.